When Lawrence Low took over the Blue Mansion in 1990, a year after Cheong Kam Long, the last son of Cheong Fat Zi, died, it was in a state of disrepair. Conservation laws and knowledge in Georgetown at that time were lax. There was tremendous pressure for the property to be demolished and the site redeveloped. Lawrence's aim was to restore the mansion to its original grandeur and to uphold the authenticity of its architecture as much as possible, with focus on its tangible and intangible features and elements.
When we first purchased the building in 1990, I have to confess that I had completely no idea of what conservation meant. So really I had to apply common sense and factor that in. All I knew is that I wanted to create a benchmark conservation project to be used as an iconic, instructive building in Penang. How to achieve it, I wasn't quite sure, but that was what I wanted, to create a benchmark conservation project, which sets the tone for the rest of conservation works in Penang and Malaysia. In the end, it proved to be the right decision because since I didn't know what else to do, I would say to the craftsmen, put back what there was originally. So that became the vision. Other aspects had to do with perhaps how we activate the building, but that came along a lot later. The third point was the activation of the building itself after it's been restored. We weren't sure what the actual use of the building would be, but we knew that we would want to execute one principle. The principle was that we realized we had to bring back the cycle of life into the building in order for it to have this timeless quality. So the activation could be really anything, but in all probability, it pointed to the idea of it being a home, somewhere that people sleep, eat, go about their daily lives. By setting this vision and then incorporating into the final product of the house, we hoped to have created a very strong conservation consciousness about the process from start to finish. We didn't have actually a budget for conservation itself, but what we did was we knew that we had to employ the right people with the right skills. So we, in fact, were fortunate to manage to get a conservation team from China itself who had the skills to restore everything within the building back to its original state and glory. I guess we had a cap. We said, okay, we'll try and spend, not more than maybe $2 million US on everything. And that was really the budget. But it wasn't very concise in that sense because not having done it before, and in the marketplace in Penang, there were also no indicators of rates, prices, scope of works, etc. So in fact, it was like learning from scratch how to manage the financial aspect of conservation. So we left the scope to the contractors from China, and where they couldn't fill in the gaps, we hired locals to do it. But clearly, it referred to almost every single element within the building, from the timber works to the plastering, to the Chen Nian, ceramic cut and paste shard work, to Chai Hui, which is really painted surfaces, to the floor, to the ceiling, to the roof. All of that literally had to be touched up and changed. In fact, we had to change the whole roof because nothing had been done with it for over 100 years. I was fortunate enough to have somebody else do the research. Right? As I said, I knew nothing about conservation. I wasn't trained in conservation itself. But what happened was that one of our partners had a friend who knew a friend in Beijing who was actually the director of the Department of Ancient Monuments. He came out, he did it, and then he went back to China, he refined it, and then we commissioned him to help us get all the materials, identify the contracting team and the artisans, and they arrived as a whole package, and that was. So everything was done in accordance with actually best practice at that time in China. And so we were very, very lucky that we had these contacts purely through our networks. If we didn't have that, I would most probably have messed up the place. When we submitted our dossier for the UNESCO awards, they obviously had already outlined all the criteria we were required to fulfill or at least understand the consequence of. So in terms of understanding the place, it really related to what were the cultural values embedded in the place. What was the cultural essence of it? So just to name an example, what was fundamentally very important in this building was actually feng shui, the wind and water, principles of geomancy on which the building was literally laid out by the chief craftsman or the chief artisan. And they brought in this feng shui master. Based on Chong Fat Si's time and birth, they laid out the building. That was the most important aspect of this building. But more importantly, very unique to this site is what I call the chi vortex or the chi point, the energy point that is actually centered right in the center of the courtyard. Having identified it, he then built and located it right in the center of the courtyard plan. So it has become the heart of the building. So this is just one aspect of understanding the site. Well, I think we have always celebrated the fact that it won a UNESCO award. And since technical achievement is one of the main criteria, how well did we conserve the site, and what techniques did we use, and how did we interpret the site through the conservation works itself. So when there's a visitor, they will always be very curious about the state of conservation. We'll tell them that we found it in a state of disrepair. What did it look like? So we show them the before pictures, and then we show them the after. And all of that points to actually the fabric of the building itself. And then we explain, for example, how the ceramic cut and paste shard work was restored. We show them the bowls that were imported, we show them how it's cut, we show them how they made the putty and stuck it onto the wall. So I think all of that is actually explained when somebody comes to the house, say on a tour, or a private friend comes and is curious about it. That's what we tell them about how we achieve technical excellence in the building. Intrinsic in any conservation project is the fact that you need to sustain the site. You need to be able to manage the site. You need to make it viable for you to manage the site. So it's either in terms of funds, or it's in terms of durability, or it's in terms of management. So in terms of sustainability, the concept of sustainability, I guess we have brought the building back to what it was before. What we needed to do was to just keep and maintain the standards. So we had to find a business model to activate the building with, which will generate sufficient funds for us to maintain it. And in that sense, the physical sustainability of building is taken care of. In terms of the operational sustainability, in relation to aspects of weather and use, etc., it came with the whole activation of the building as a heritage homestay and subsequently as a hotel in order to generate recurring income. Right? We did not want to rely on conserve funds per se, or funds that were really reserved for capital expenditure. So it's actually the hotel operations that gave us this recurring income, which then allowed us to continue to sustain the building in the fashion that we really wanted to. We spoke about something earlier about the urban legend of the place, the myth that came at the very onset of the acquisition of the building, where we said that we were going to save this building for the people of Penang. That myth has continued throughout time, and in fact, it has gone full circle. The last business model, in fact, returns to the originating idea about saving the building for posterity for the people of Penang. Something which up to today people sort of believe in. And then that becomes the driving call for whatever we do in terms of opening up the place, making it more inclusive, get the local population to appreciate it more, to get Malaysians to understand what heritage is all about, and come to this place and see it captured within the practice and within the interpretation of the place. So in that sense, that collective idea that has really sustained the true vision of the place. At the end of the day, whatever business model you put into place, it must still carry that vision forward. Well, I think one of the greatest impact with influencing practice and policies in Penang was the fact that they stopped hammer piling in heritage sites and even in sites close to heritage buildings. It was a result of the court case that we fought in 1996 when the adjoining Hotel Continental, started to pile. And in the process of piling, and they were using hammer piles, driving concrete piles into the ground, it started to cause the building to crack. And they were not minor cracks. In fact, there were cracks all the way from the back of the building right to the front gate where the Chinese gateway was. But what that case really made it very important for the council to recognize is that hammer piling in sensitive heritage areas will cause and destroy heritage buildings. So they stopped hammer piling in heritage sites. And so within the World Heritage Site itself, you're no longer allowed to use hammer piling. So that's one of the policies. But in relation to this building also, they started to look at conservation guidelines more seriously, which resulted in actually aspiring to get World Heritage listing for Georgetown. So in a sense, this was a contributor to that success story, that it helped to encourage the government and the communities to aspire to get World Heritage listing for the historic core of Penang. And I think that's a major impact that we have created with this building. I think the fact that we accomplished what we set out to do in our vision, it wasn't just about a single element, but it was about the totality of what it signified. And I think of that, I'm proud. On that, I've achieved what I set out to achieve in terms of its conservation and restoration. And the fact that it's now an influencer in the rest of the nation. I think that is, and the fact that it also trickled down to a lot of other actions that were more global, that were more national in nature. That is really, what I'm really happy with in terms of the success story.
The restoration and adaptive reuse of Cheong Fat Zi Mansion pioneered a conservation movement in Penang. Over time, the project has become a model for conservation best practice throughout the region. The restoration process of the Blue Mansion serves as a showcase for the construction techniques and craftsmanships of the past. The project has successfully restored a heritage building to its former glory and returned a cultural landmark to the Penang community.